Welcome to Diagnosing Dx, the podcast giving diagnostics the platform it deserves. While therapeutics and devices often take centre stage, diagnostics is the engine driving precision medicine. I'm your host, David Philby, and each week we spotlight the innovators, breakthroughs, and real-world challenges shaping the future of DX. In this episode of Diagnosing DX, I'm joined by Spencer Price, CEO of OraLiva. Spencer's journey is unconventional, moving from autonomous vehicles into building a precision diagnostic for oral cancer. We talked about how OraLiva approached commercialisation from day one, why reimbursement strategy mattered at seed stage, and what it really takes to turn strong science into a diagnostic that fits clinical workflows. This is a great example of turning breakthrough science into a product that actually changes care and gets paid. Welcome to the show, Spencer. Great to have you on. How are you today?
Great. Thank you, David, for having me.
And where are you in the world?
I'm in New York. I split time between New York and our lab in North Carolina, so you happen to catch me in Manhattan today.
I weirdly used to split my time between New York and Charlotte, North Carolina, every month. So
We're probably on the
for
same
about 2
frequent
years.
flyer plane.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I've probably got loads of unclaimed points somewhere in miles. New York's pretty cold at the moment, so hopefully the podcast will warm you up. But I'm excited to get into it with OraLiva today because you guys have had a bunch of cool milestones over the last 6 months and even really recently. So it'd be cool to hear what's the latest. But before we do that, if you'd be so kind as to introduce yourself and your background and career up until this point, that would be great.
Yeah, happy to. And maybe probably a different background than a lot of your guests, but Spencer Price, CEO of OraLiva. I've been with the company in different variations for about 2.5 years now. I actually met the company and John, our founder, while at business school at NYU here in the city. So, but my background is in engineering. I'm a mechanical engineer, have a master's in industrial and operations engineering. So heavy focus on the engineering operations side of the business. But I actually come from the automotive space. I spent 10 years developing autonomous and electric vehicles with GM, helped build a small startup within that enterprise. That sort of lit the light for me that I wanted to try something a little bit smaller, a little more startup friendly. It was, as an engineer, my first experience getting exposure to the customer, to marketing, to finance. So that sort of inspired my journey and transition. So after 10 years at GM, I transitioned to getting my MBA at NYU. And then during what's a fabulous program at the school there, which is the Endless Frontier Labs Accelerator, run by Deepak Hedge. He's his incredible insights into building young companies focused on technical and scientific innovation, but that lacked perhaps the business or the product perspective on how to raise money around that idea. So it was an MBA in that program, met John and his team who had applied to that program there. And there was a really great fit within the company. There was a clear scientific rigor and backbone that the company had to that point, but they didn't quite know how to sharpen the pen on the business side. How do I talk to investors? How do I take and synthesize this message to communities outside of a scientific or technical community? And then how do I grow and build a business around it? So a bit of a transition for me, and there's a lot of similarities between automotive and the medical industry, heavily regulated, long lead times, lots of approvals. In diagnostics in particular, a lot of engineering and manufacturing requirements. And so a lot of that stuff carried over. Obviously, the healthcare space was a bit new to me, but we have a good team here to lean on as well. But I've been here about 2 years now, initially as an MBA extern, and then progressively given more responsibility with the company over time, and then became CEO last year. So like with any small startup, CEO is basically chief firefighter. So I oversee just about anything that's hot and bothersome at the company, but it's a great space to be.
Such a fascinating route to becoming a diagnostic CEO. There's so much to unpack here. Before we do that, where are the company at the moment then? Sort of what phase are we talking? Because the CEO role, as you said, the sort of responsibilities of the role are so fluid depending on, the current upcoming milestones. So where are OraLiva at the moment?
Yeah. And before I get too deep into the technical side of things, I'll offer at a high level, we're both commercializing our current product and then developing a pathway for our company to go point of care as well. So with that, we raised our seed investment last year, led by a clinical laboratory expert, a guy who actually exited his own series of labs. So really incredible angel investor who helped lead the round. We have a couple of investments from East Coast and West Coast VCs. That in turn catalyzed some of our grant funding as well. So last year we received over $3.5 million of NSF and NIH grant funding. And all that in totality allowed us to operationalize our current diagnostic and then build this platform pathway for point of care usage as a point of care device. So our product is built around this AI-powered cytology platform. So this is a microfluidics cartridge. That's the consumable bit. It gets put into our AI imaging device. It's the cytology bit, and then we have an AI model that looks at the cell morphology of the sample and spits back a quantitative result, a risk score on the patient in question. So our focus initially is in oral cancer. So this is applicable to a series of epithelial cancers, which in some sense is what the grant funding over the last summer was delivered to do. But our focus initially is with oral cancer. So we're in the process now, maybe a week away from the recording of this episode, of launching a test commercially. So we expect to be in the market testing patients for oral cancer next week. Alongside of that, we're working on moving this entire device to point of care so that your test result can be available to a patient and provider during the patient visit, so within 30 minutes.
Wow. Okay, so ready to commercialize, seed round raised last year. Your role in the company is now CEO. So were you the CEO at the time of the seed raise?
Not at the time of the seed raise, but I think a lot of what was perhaps missing when the company and I first met, and I think is sort of the genesis of this Endless Frontiers program, is that there is a ton of incredible science and technology that gets lost to time because there is a loss or a lack of sense from the technical founders on how to actually operationalize this idea. So I had this incredible insight. I had this incredible technology. To me, as a technical person, that's fascinating, but you need to build a product around that. You need to build a business model around that product, and you need to build a go-to-market plan to actually sell that. So when the company joined that program, I think all of those downstream activities were missing. So what I think I was foundational in doing for the company is building that perspective, the pathway to commercialization, selling that to the investors, and then actually putting pen to paper, and over the past year, operationalizing our CLIA lab in North Carolina, building the commercial and strategic partnerships to enable us to do that, and then finally put a test in the market. So I think that was sort of the reason of some of the repositioning there. But I don't want to neglect the fact that this is a company built on over a decade of research by John and his team. It required just a little bit of the cherry on top on the commercialization perspective.
Yeah, interesting. So obviously you were heavily involved in ensuring the company was aligned and of interest to investors. It sounds like an investor
Mm-hmm.
might have looked at it as less of a company and more of a, I wouldn't maybe not even say product, maybe just science, right?
Yeah.
And or potentially uninvestable. Was that your first experience of being involved in like a seed raise in your career?
In a seed, yes. I had prior startup experience, both with a startup that was built within General Motors, the automotive manufacturer. We didn't have seed money. We had capital from the company. It actually learned a lot of important lessons about the problems with having too much money without great vision. I would say that company, we learned a lot during that process. And one of the things that stuck out to me during the course of that is we had millions of dollars of investment, internal investment allocation to build this startup at GM, but it really lacked the idea of what we want to do for the customer. So um, that was without going too far into that story, it was a startup built around a product, but not a business model. And when the rubber hit the road and we started putting it in front of customers, it really lacked traction because we didn't understand their operations, their needs, and it floundered. So, um, going back to your question on seed funding, that was an example of being part of a company that had, internal seed funding,
Yeah.
but too much capital without enough vision.
Mm.
I had another experience with a startup where we tried to raise a Series A, an inductive charging company. That taught me a lot about what investors are looking for, how to have those conversations, and what's meaningful both for the investor and the startup and the ecosystem, how to build a win-win-win case.
Mm.
And then with OraLiva, a lot of those lessons were learned both on those prior experiences, but also with the Endless Frontier Labs with Deepak.
Yeah. Um, the as you came into the world of diagnostics, it's not an easy landscape to raise money.
Hmm.
Were you shocked or surprised going through that period with the company, um, by anything going through that raise, or was or I guess this is a double barrel question, but or did you just see things with your mindset and perspective operationally and technically and go, do you know what, like it doesn't matter what industry we're in or how investors currently emotionally see that industry, if we get our processes and systems and plans and everything else lined up to be operationally sound, then we put ourselves in a good position? Or did the diagnostics industry shock you in any way, sort of as you were going through that round?
No, it's a great question, and there's a bit of naivete helped a bit in the initial few months
Bliss.
and maybe the first year with the company. What was clear to me initially was there was something foundationally different about John and the company and the science that he was building. There was a clear need in the market for a test like ours. I think the story that he was telling was compelling, and it was clear and has been clear, over the past couple of years, getting to know him, that he's a bit of a white whale in terms of the research community. He has clout. He does things the right way. He builds really incredible, scientific validation and does things the right way on the technical and science front. So he may not be able to communicate that to a commercial payer or to a strategic partner, but as a technical person myself, it was clear foundationally what the company was built on, how incredible this database of data we had around oral dysplastic lesions was. And then the clear market need felt like there was a great fit there. What was evident to me pretty quickly is that in healthcare, payment is everything, and getting codes and having a pathway to reimbursement is critical. Had we not had a greater pathway to do that, or more established pathway to do that, that probably would have raised some questions earlier on. But as we've announced recently, we have this partnership with Delta Dental that's allowing providers to get reimbursed for the sample collection. And so having those key pieces in place meant that while perhaps there's not as much money in diagnostics as there is in therapeutics, or other areas of healthcare, that this was a great market fit, a foundational bit of science, and then something that becomes greater than just the first indication for oral cancer, when you start doing tech transfer learning to these other indications for use. So the research we're doing now into anal cancer, bladder cancer, and cervical cancer adds fuel to fire for what this platform can become.
Interesting. You mentioned the founders a couple of times. Um, it's I think it's a real positive, and obviously I'd love to hear your perspective. But I feel like it's a positive whenever founders early on identify that they're probably not the right people to be the CEO
Mm.
of an early stage company for whatever reason. But that humility,
Yeah.
I think that's shown in founders. What were the founders' backgrounds, and why, how did that sort of transition happen, and what were their perspectives to say, do you know what, Spencer, you're going to be better leading this company than we are through the next phase of the journey?
Yeah. Dr. John McDevitt, scientific founder of the company, has been researching the core technology here for the better part of 2 decades. Um, he it was evident early on in our relationship that he had the humility to know what he's great at, and he's great at a lot of things, and where are the places where you could plug in someone who has a little bit more experience or insight, and you guys can work copacetically together and enhance each other's vision. So I think contrasting that with experiences I'd had with other founders and other executives or leaders, that was immediately evident to me how humble he is and how willing he is to take feedback from people who he recognizes as experts or better positioned than he is. He's still uh, I think he would describe himself as an expert in the area he's an expert in, and I think one of the best. But that humility is part of one of the big wins for me in getting to know the company initially. So I think especially for technical companies like we've talked about, that oftentimes is a point of success or failure, to know where your limitations are and how do I translate this key technical insight into something that not only is interesting to me as a researcher, but is meaningful to a patient, a provider, adds value to their clinical workflow, can get reimbursed by a payer. So you have to think, especially in healthcare, about so many different key stakeholders, that you can't just have the technical perspective unless you're thinking very narrowly about selling into direct enterprise or being a supplier of a particular device to an OEM per se.
Yeah. And has it been a sharp learning curve for you? Because I feel like in diagnostics, there's founders that have worked in diagnostics 20, 30, 40 years who start companies and fail to get the right things lined up, especially around reimbursement, how you
Mhm.
educate patients and physicians, and ultimately impact positively workflows and patients' lives. But raising capital, all these things. I mean, has it been a sharp learning curve, coming into the industry in the last few years, and now you're the CEO of a seed stage diagnostics company?
Definitely. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of carryover learnings. And I think that helped me realize at the outset all the things I didn't probably know. Having worked in the automotive industry, safety is critically important. You're dealing with people's lives, and going through validation and testing is incredibly important. So it dawned on me that this isn't just a product that needs to go to market, but you have to understand foundationally what it is we're building, how it impacts patient lives. And so I think, having come from a safety oriented, maybe a slow moving industry like automotive, it really helped me when I entered the company be careful about making sure I know as much as possible going into these meetings, being humble and realizing I'm new to this and being open
Mm.
minded, but a recognition that there's a lot that I know that I don't know, and there's a lot that I don't know that I don't know. And frankly, there's no better way to learn the things that you don't know than just jump in feet first and go into the deep end. So I think part of what has helped my learning curve over the past couple of years has been a willingness to just interact with the communities, talk to experts, be open-minded, be upfront with them that I'm willing to learn and to absorb information. But then also to develop your own opinion about things as well. There is benefit to being a new voice in an industry because you can see things a bit differently than the establishment and maybe question some things as well. So, the speed with which we run pilots, the manner in which we collect patient medical insurance that is different from how dental insurance works. I think challenging those perspectives on what's possible in some ways has helped us advance as well too. So um, I think that it's been both a benefit and a hindrance to learning, but all in all, I think has gotten us to a pretty successful point.
The way you talk about it, it might be a superpower. I actually love the
Ignorance helps a lot if you don't know what your limitations are, but it's important to know how much you don't know too.
yeah, and I think that if you're developing a commercial strategy for an industry that you're relatively new to, then the amount of research and due diligence you do on ultimately case studies and routes to market and everything else in between
Hmm.
just means that there is just zero arrogance to it, right? It has to be. And actually sometimes the biggest failures in diagnostics, because there is a lot of failures, the biggest diagnostics failures come from the stubbornness
Hmm.
of thinking great science is going to be enough, and it just isn't.
Yeah.
And that's and people fall in love with their sort of their own baby, and it's
I think one of the keys to successful startups is preserving optionality for as long as possible, right? You want to have a specific vision of what you want to accomplish, but optionality is what preserves your ability to pivot and change with market dynamics, with customer feedback. And if you're so committed to just one direction, it really limits you, in your flexibility when it comes time to change and your ability to consume new information as you're presented it, as you're developing. So I think those things kind of go hand in hand. Is optionality means you have to have a broad perspective and a willingness to learn. It also means you have to be humble and know that you may not know everything. So you do need a sharp perspective. You do need to be able to move confidently and orchestrate a team around a particular direction, but you do need to be able to have flexibility and preserve that optionality because that's, in some sense, it's free for as long as you can maintain it, and it's a valuable resource to have when you need to pull on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's fantastic. Like, why should you be convinced one thing is going to work when you don't have that proof of concept behind you telling you the sort of loyalty almost to this is how the things should be done. This is how we did it at this company that I grew up in.
Mhm.
If you don't bring that to the table, instead you sort of going, well, there's no reason for me to be so narrow-minded to one direction. I can just continuously play the options until they prove to me that I should continue to put faith in that direction.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah,
great.
and dental in particular, for your listeners or viewers who aren't as familiar with the dental industry, it's a complex industry. It has its own insurance. It has a multifaceted provider network. You've got GP dentists, hygienists, periodontists, oral surgeons, ENTs. You got large enterprise dental service organizations, hospitals, dental schools, medical schools. So the frank answer is we live in a very dynamic and complex healthcare environment just by nature of what our first product indication is in, oral
Right.
cancer. So it requires a lot of flexibility there. And what OraLiva is trying to do here is really a paradigm shift in care, is to move oral cancer screening and detection upstream, move it to the front lines where it hasn't resided historically. Today, most care is done with the visual tactile exam, but without a proper adjunctive akin to like the pap smear for cervical cancer, we are where we are today, which is 60,000 new cases of oral cancer every year and care that hasn't changed in 70 years. Whereas you see the implementation of the pap smear for cervical cancer and you see an 85% reduction in incident rates over that time. So We are changing the paradigm of care. We're offering a new type of test. This isn't just a biopsy. It's not a pure adjunctive. It's a precision diagnostic that learns about lesions. It learns about the patient with more testing, so it gets more accurate and more specific over time. So we're offering to the healthcare community something that's different, and they're going to learn a lot about what it means for their workflow alongside of us. So that requires a bit of flexibility on both ends.
Is it your belief that the 60,000 new oral cancer cases detected every year, is that a fraction of what's actually going undetected as well, because the existing standard of care just isn't good enough?
Well, no, I think what that number represents what today is, let's describe a fishing net with a lot of holes. So in any sort of diagnostic, you want to be able to catch disease early and create an efficient pipeline where you're sending the right patients on for care and you're keeping the right patients within primary or secondary care that should be monitored or even ruled out. That 60,000 patients represents today an industry that hasn't addressed oral cancer in over 70 years. That incident rate hasn't dropped like it has with cervical cancer. When you introduce a pap smear, you see the incident rate goes down because you catch the disease earlier, and that's not the case today. Majority of oral cancer cases are caught late stage, so over 70% of cases are caught stage 3, stage 4. That's not even just cancer, but late stage cancer. And when you do so, survival rate, 5-year survival rate is under 50%. So there's a lot of work to be done here. What we're focusing on is sending along the right types of patients to secondary and tertiary care that should see earlier interception. So they want to go on to an oral surgeon or an ENT who might want to either monitor or biopsy them earlier in the progression of their lesion. Ideally, we're capturing the disease at moderate or severe dysplasia, which is that precancerous phase. And then we're preventing more patients from going on and getting referred who don't need to be, who otherwise, if the dentists who are reliant on a visual tactile exam today are sending on patients, over referring patients and getting this nasty invasive scalpel biopsy, that's a problem with the system as well. So that 60,000 is what we hope is the ceiling, and with improved screening and care, that number goes down over time.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the partnership with Delta Dental, which is significant, but fairly recently announced. What does that allow you to do?
Yeah, it actually the partnership has been ongoing for a number of years, and Delta Dental has sponsored some of the research behind this. I think, again, the reason to partner with a great scientific founder is his clout has sort of commanded this interest from the community, not just from the scientific community, but from the payer community as well. So that partnership now has transformed into this multi-state commercial launch. So Delta Dental of North Carolina, Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio are allowing OraLiva to release in their states. So we use an existing adjunctive diagnostic procedural code to allow the dentist to collect the sample and get reimbursed for it. We collect the sample, process it in our CLIA lab in North Carolina, and bill patient medical insurance for the test. So all in all, a relatively streamlined process using existing adjunctive workflows and codes, and basically they're offering to cover the test in these first 4 states. So that coverage will expand over time, but this is sort of our launch point. Alongside of that, like we talked earlier, training and education is incredibly important. I think that is one thing that has been emphasized from just about every person you talk to in the industry is this level of change requires marketing, it requires education, it requires training. A lot of these dentists are trained in dental school, and that sort of establishes their standard of care for the foreseeable future. So what Delta Dental is also providing is access to a continuing dental education module that they can take for credit that is focused on AI cytology, the science behind OraLiva's test, and then also to distribute that that content to their network. And alongside of that, they've been making some friendly connections to DSOs and providers in their network to help move the needle a bit too. So having their support, having the support of a payer is a huge win, as you can imagine, from any diagnostic. Getting that foothold in the reimbursement side has been a reason, I think, a lot for our success, but built on this scientific validation.
Mm. Considering you've raised seed fairly recently, um, being under reimbursement anywhere and anyhow, feels like you're pacing ahead of the classic diagnostic. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
average time to reimbursement is like 7 years in diagnostics, objectively.
Mhm.
Feels like you've managed to get that sort of commercial traction really early in the journey. That's awesome.
Yeah. And you'd asked earlier about what is my role as CEO, and why did it carve out the certain responsibilities that it's carved out. I think you've gathered that we are farther along than most diagnostic companies are at a seed round. We have reimbursement in place. We have an operational lab that's going to go green here in a week. And we have a test that it'll hit the market and start testing patients in a commercial setting pretty shortly. So um, my focus has been on more so the commercialization component than than on the regulatory and reimbursement pathway. So part of that responsibility carve out has just been because of how far along the company is at this point. So there's still a long pathway to get to point of care usage. So like I mentioned, today we operate as a laboratory developed test. So we have this brush kit. We collect samples at the dental office or at the oral surgery office. They get sent back to our lab. Ultimately, though, we own the clinical workflow, and so what today is a back office operation or wet lab operation, we own the entire workflow, and our intent is to move that to point of care. So you would take a brush sample of a patient, put it in a device, and you get the results back. You have it within 30 minutes that you have on site there. So that pathway requires a little bit more curation. We'll have to pursue new PLA codes. And so there's a pathway there that requires a little bit more oversight and attention. But the nuance here is that we have a feasible commercial pathway to start getting testing. And in some sense, that commercial testing helps support our regulatory pathway as well, because we use evidence from commercial testing as clinical utility, and that helps support our argument for the FDA.
How long does it take to go from the clear lab setup where you're now receiving samples, you've got reimbursement, you're in fantastic shape, right?
Mhm.
But how long does it take to go from where you are now to being live on the point of care side and being able to put those sort of, the access into a dental office?
Yeah. It's a question that requires a consideration of, how deep the market is in the LDT, what the appetite is in the investment community. Our hope is to get something in the market by 2028, 2029. So we're pursuing pathways now for breakthrough device designation and going through the QSub process this year. But we have an incredible database of these oral dysplastic lesions that was collected with this Grand Opportunity Study John collected a number of years ago. So we've already done what effectively is the registration studies, and we just need to demonstrate that there's an effective transfer of the technology from that original data set to current clinical utility. So our hope is that the pathway there is a couple of years, but the reality is that as an LDT, there's feasibility for us to be successful in this market and sort of plow ahead here um, while that pathway comes to bear as well.
Yeah, makes sense. What are the future milestones that we should be looking out for OraLiva over the next sort of 12 months?
Well, like I've mentioned, we're now conducting the tech transfer learning moving what is today an oral dysplastic lesion model to these other cancers. So the exciting thing for us is while we are focused on the commercial launch of our oral cancer test, we now have the opportunity to onboard these additional indications. And maybe even before we get to point of care, we'll have something for cervical, anal, or bladder on the market as an LDT as well. So those are exciting milestones for us. I think our first biggest one is going to be, patient care and capturing the first cancer patient. I think we're all going to be very excited about that first case. Um, but for us, it's going to be market growth, market appetite, making sure we're monitoring application of the test, the messaging, marketing, and growing with what we're responding to. So this is, like I mentioned, just a difference in the way care is conducted in these frontline environments and in primary care. And so once we have market adoption and recidivism and reuse, that I think we'll be very happy.
You've been in diagnostics a couple of years now. What's your objective opinion on the industry now that you've been in it a few years, and where we're heading as an industry or maybe just 2026? We're still early in the year. How are you feeling about the year ahead for the market?
Well, I'll say on a personal note, I love the industry. I'm a mechanical engineer. I like the physical application of healthcare and in how it manifests in these devices. And so that I really personally just appreciate. And then the opportunity to transform, engineering insights into patient care, improve quality of life, health-saving technologies, that I think is really exciting. It's also dawned on me that diagnostics, I think, is an underappreciated part of preventative care. Everyone talks about how healthcare is moving upstream. Millennials more so than ever are looking for more ownership of their information, more ownership of their data. And I think diagnostics is going to sail on the tailwinds of that interest to move care and insights and data into the hand of the patient and to do so earlier. So I don't know how quickly the momentum's going to pick up, but we talked earlier about how diagnostics maybe doesn't have its fair share of the startup investment as therapeutics and treatments does. But I think as these things shift and as the market appreciates what preventative care and diagnostics role in that is, I think there's going to be an appreciable interest in what the industry is going to see and grow into over the next couple of years. So I find that very exciting. I think that's not just true for cancer diagnostics, but true for a litany of other tests out there. And I think it's important that we see ourselves as part of that transition to earlier insights, earlier data, actionable recommendations, but pairing that obviously with great quality too, right? The problem is the earlier upstream you go, the lower your accuracy is in some cases. So you don't want to desensitize patients to low accuracy, low sensitivity, low specificity tests if it's going to undermine the value of what you're trying to accomplish in the first place.
I think that's a really good objective overview of the industry, to be honest, Spencer. I think the way you say it, there's hope in this new generation. The amount of the sort of how much they crave their own data and health insights, and how they want access to more and more and more to make sort of better informed decisions. That should really bode well for the diagnostics industry, but it still feels like an industry that's quietly bubbling along. And actually, there's been some really nice news, obviously, in the last sort of 6 to 12 months around acquisitions and IPOs, which put good eyes on the industry. We've also had a good start in January on the investment side, which is nice to see. Let's hope it continues, because I agree with you that the purpose of the industry, the benefit of it, if we put more emphasis on earlier detection, can only be helpful to the strain on workflows that we see, and the cost of surgeries and therapies much later down the line.
Yeah, and I think let's not forget that with a new generation of healthcare providers, they are part of um, that mentality change and the shift into
Yeah.
preventative care. And so this isn't just something that's going to be led by the consumer, but also by the supplier, in which case is your healthcare provider. So you see, at least especially in dental, a lot of these young students graduating from dental school being really open-minded about innovation, about what new technologies can do for their practice.
Yeah.
They're being more open-minded about artificial intelligence, and you see that being spread all over the place. It's not just in diagnostics, but workflow, claims automation, scheduling. So I think you're going to see a new generation of healthcare providers that is incredibly attuned to what technology and AI can do. And I think that diagnostic industry is going to be a huge benefactor of the AI revolution and the insights that you can garner with these large models. So we made a transition last year from a machine learning model, which we've called AI nominally, but machine learning is just big data. It's not really AI,
Mhm.
and transitioned into a deep neural network model. So it's able to learn faster, produce results quicker, and garner better insights. And so I have to imagine that the benefits that we're seeing internally are being shared by all these other companies. So I think that growth is going to come, from the pull side, from the providers and the patients who want these really innovative technologies, understand care at an earlier level, but also by the push side, where suppliers, device developers, diagnostic companies are garnering better and better insights.
Fantastic. OraLiva could be an unbelievable case study for the industry to look at. I think like if you guys go from the development you've done over a long period, the collection of data throughout, the seed round, reimbursement, and then quickly show commercial success into then point of care, that sort of case study in itself is a story that deserves to be told. And I think the one thing I would always say about the diagnostics community is they do genuinely support and root for each other and want
Mhm.
to see positive outcomes through new science making it. And I think this is a case study that I think everyone should be rooting for, and hopefully we get to look at and go, wow, look at how quickly they got through to putting that or changing the standard of care at the point of care. It's an awesome case study. So, well, I can only sort of wish you the best, Spencer. I think it's awesome.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think even in the oral cancer community, this is probably parroted throughout, but to other industries as well. But with any big sea change, it requires, a collaborative effort from a lot of people. And so the successes will come not just from individual endeavors, but from the support of key stakeholders, suppliers, competitors in some sense, to sort of to raise the tide and high tide raises all boats kind of expression where I think the ecosystem benefits from these successes and building on the momentum. So I appreciate the kind words.
Thank you for coming on this week, Spencer. It was awesome to hear the story.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.